Why am I covered in goo? Well, because I did a thing I told myself I wasn't going to do. I bought a Rapier. Why did I tell myself I wasn't going to buy a Rapier? Well, we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, I wanted to give you my initial impressions. Just got this out of the box. This would be the Cold Steel Cavalier. Let's talk about some of the reasons I specifically chose this one, other than it was available in these hard times. But my first impressions out of the box, other than it being covered in goo, and now so am I, actually really impressed. The coloring, finish, design of this complex hilt, I really like it. This is also now the second wire-wrapped grip I've gotten on an Indian-made sword that hasn't bit me and needed like slivers and stuff pulled out of it or filed down. So that's really nicely done with some Turk's heads top and bottom. Again, no hot spots. Also, speaking of hot spots, everything's nicely rounded, and the ricasso, it's going to be really hard to kind of see in here, but there's a fixture around it, which I believe is part of the bell guard. It's rounded, so when my finger goes in there, it feels just really, really comfortable. Speaking of the shell, it is kind of this double loaf perforated. Can't speak tonight. It's been a long day. Sorry. Trying to give you a look at it without stabbing the camera or the wall in front of me. Kind of gives it a little bit of a fly eye sort of a look, but it's not too bad. What about the blade? Balance 2 1/4 inches. So that's pretty good. That's off the shell, by the way. Came with the little leather washer to stick on there. There is a fuller that runs about 1/3 of the way up the 36 1/4 inch blade. Now that's a measure from the shell, so that doesn't go down with the ricasso. That's just this part of the blade. Diamond cross section. It's got a nice tip on it. I tried a little bit of thrusting with it so far. Not much. Now it said it came sharpened, and like many Cold Steel products out of the box, I think the word sharpened means something different. There have been exceptions, like the Tulwar, but this is another one that's kind of definitely more of a butter knife. But, you know, it's also a fairly steep diamond. I think I might be able to get a slashing edge on it, but I wanted to give you a look at it before I started modifying it. The blade is surprisingly stiff. Let me back up so you can kind of get a look at this. Now, depending on how I flex it, it may flex a little bit more through the middle, but if I just put stress on the tip, it does bend a little bit more towards the pointy end, which is nice. It's stiffer than I thought it would be. A lot of reproduction rapiers, people are worried that they're going to be too floppy. Certainly seen a lot of reviews to that, but this is not. It's got a decent amount of rigidity, not too heavy, don't have the weight on it yet. I think it's coming in under 3 pounds, and it feels really light and handy in the hand. Let's take a look at the scabbard. It is, well, not reinforced, so it's floppy, but you know, that's kind of what I expected. Leather covered, the throat and the chape are these rather long blackened sections that match the fittings on the sword. Really long hook. Fit on the scabbard is, you know, most Cold Steel swords, nice and snug. This one, however, it's got a lot of that white powder compound in it that's going to take some time to get out. But all right, so before I take it out and try to sharpen it and do some serious attempts at cutting and thrusting with it, wanted to give you a look at it. And so far, for about $310 is what I paid for it with tax from Amazon. I am initially quite impressed and glad I pulled the trigger. All right, Cold Steel Cavalier Part 2. Part 2 being post-sharpening attempt and some use for a day or so. Going back to what I started the video with, I mentioned I wasn't going to buy a Rapier. Why? Well, a couple of reasons. One, despite, well, all the time I've spent with a Gen, which is fundamentally a thrusting weapon, cut and thrust weapon, but more of a thrusting weapon than obviously a Dow, I'm not a big fan of thrusting. It's interesting, I was just watching Matt Easton talk about how for human beings cutting is more appealing, especially under adrenaline. You really have to spend time practicing thrusting to make that more of an automatic or even a favored tactic. And I'll talk about the differences in cutting and thrusting in combat and at least how I feel about it. But many of my teachers have said some variation of, work on the things you're good at, but you need to work harder on the things that you're not good at. And yeah, I figured I should probably devote some time to thrusting, especially since, I've been exploring HEMA. Also, the Rapier it's one of the major weapons of HEMA, so I figure I'd be neglecting something in my exploration here if I didn't get one, and yeah, they're cool. Now, another reason I wasn't keen on getting a Rapier is length. And I did pick up a longsword, and yeah, I was a little bit reluctant on getting the longsword, again, because of the length. Well, why? Part of this is my practice and just, kind of what I've learned based on my environment and the way I practice. I like to be able to get up and move and pick up a sword and just practice whenever I've got a spare 5 minutes. Anytime during the day, whether I'm working or whatever. So that means most of my practice happens in street clothes indoors. When the weather's bad, which may be, well, at least this year, it was like 6 months running, I don't get a chance to go outside where I've got space to work with a longer weapon. I also don't get opportunity to go to a gym or a school anywhere locally. I'm pretty much on my own here, have been for quite a while. So if I can't use the weapon in a small space, also just generally in martial arts, because I am a shorter guy with shorter reach, I tend to favor martial arts and weapons that focus in what would otherwise be considered the medium to short range. Long range has never really been my comfort zone. However, again, I figured I should probably work on that since I've been neglecting it. Now, unlike the longsword, since you do a lot more thrusting with a rapier, I can kind of practice thrusting, again, idle, practice indoors in a small space. As long as I've got some length in the room, I don't necessarily have to have the high ceiling and the distance between the walls that I would if I was cutting. So that's nice. Why did I pick this one? Well, I mentioned, it was available. And so many swords haven't been available in 2020 and post-2020. But I did specifically have this as one of my primary choices. I've been a little bit wary about Cold Steel because I've had good and bad experiences with Cold Steel swords. But a couple of things I liked about this one. The length is a little bit shorter than a lot of other rapiers at 36¼ inch blade. It does have a nice stiff diamond cross section, and I like the idea of having at least a partial shell guard. Way back from my very brief experience in foil fencing, that guard on that foil got hit and poked a lot, and just thinking that if I'm going to be working with a pokey sword, the more I can get between my hand and the other guy, that's going to make me comfortable. And not too many rapiers had shells on them. So that was something to consider. So length, guard, and weight. 2 pounds 11 ounces according to my scale. Point of balance, as I said in part 1, 2¼ inches off the guard. So that makes it nice and handy. And in the last couple days of using this thing, the grip is just really comfortable. There's all sorts of nice little comfy shapes in here for my hand. Just really handy. Again, even though I haven't been a terrible fan of thrusting, this is a good sword for practicing that very thing. So I think for my practice, this was a good investment. Now, As I said, I attempted to sharpen it. Now what I managed to do was eliminate the secondary bevel and give it more of an apple seed and clean it up to make it look reasonably nice. I think it has improved it aesthetically speaking. Functionally, no. Why? Well, the angle of the edge on my katana, especially the ones that cut really well, they're usually about a 20 to maybe a 25 degree edge. My European swords that are decent cutters, they run about, well, 30 to 35 degrees. I could put a good edge on those and get away with cutting with them. Even some of the really kind of rough cold steel and other Euro sword edges that have been functionally sharp, you know, they're running about 35, 40 degrees. 60 degree edge, okay? Yeah. No way. I mean, the edge planes themselves, if the edge hadn't been ground down on here to begin with from the factory, if I just went with the flats of the diamonds, that's 55 degrees. So you're really not beating that unless you completely reshape the blade of the sword, which is going to make it significantly thinner, and it's going to lose its rigidity. And this thing has actually some pretty impressive rigidity. And if you look at the way it flexes, yeah, much more towards the tip. I love the rigidity of the blade. I don't want to mess it up. So I'm going to have to live with the fact that this, well, it'll hurt. It'll scratch. It does thrusting really well. And we'll talk about thrusting. I plan to do a video here really quick comparing the Gen and how that thrusts to other kinds of swords. So stay tuned for that one. But in the meantime, I think for about $300 and change, this is a nice rapier. This is from the guy who doesn't really know anything about rapiers, but you know, he knows what he likes in a sword. And this would not normally be a kind of sword that I like. And well, I like it. Makes me want to learn more, work with this more. So, possibly to be continued. Until such time, as usual, hope you found this enjoyable, interesting, informative, useful information. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again.